This is by far the biggest project I have ever gone through with, and I was very happy with the result. The log cost me $150 with shipping. I think that's a very fair price, judged by how nice the wooden colors of this log turned out to be. Alright, let's have a look at the designing process. I early on decided I wanted to make a large cat sculpture. I fell in love with this design early on, but I knew I was going to work with a log that had a lot of cracks in it, so I had to save it for later. I do not particularly see working with a cracked up log as a problem, since it can create beautiful contrasts between a smooth finish and the cracks themselves. The design I just pointed at would also be problematic with a cracked log. As you can see, the sketches are fairly small. They still communicate the idea really well, and making them larger would not make the idea any clearer. It would only be more time consuming and energy demanding early on. So after exploring ideas and taking into account technical aspects, this is the design I ended up with. There are a few nubs on the outside of the log. These probably hide treasure beneath them in the form of nice wood figure and color. I was tempted to have the largest crack running through one of Amodius' eyes, but I decided to place it at the neck instead. By the way, I named this sculpture Amodius. I think it was cool to give him a name. And interestingly enough, giving him a name made me treat him more as something living when I was creating him. I felt a responsibility to bring out his personality in the main facial features. This was both fun and kinda wholesome, as I did not really feel alone when I was in the workshop. So yeah, this made me kind of excited. I printed out a 1:1 size sketch of how large the sculpture would end up looking. For this project, I will be using a chainsaw for the first time in my life. Now that's pretty embarrassing. I did struggle a little bit, since the black walnut is so hard, but it fulfilled its purpose, to remove large chunks of wood very quickly. I have heard there are different types of teeth on chainsaws depending on the cut. It would probably have been better to use a chain made to cut along the log here. As I am going bigger in my sculptures, I realize that there is a lot I need to learn, and also that there is a lot of equipment and tools I need to invest in. I see this as a positive in general, since investing in machines and such along my journey are small goals. I wasn't really sure how to start getting the sculpture out of this log, but after thinking a bit I figured that going from top to bottom would be the best choice. Mainly because I feel like this way it would make it easier to get the proportions correct. Working with a chainsaw definitely was something I liked, but I really have to get some kind of vise for my next large sculpture, so that the log won't move around as I'm cutting. I cleaned the workshop really well before starting this project, but as you can see the chainsaw leaves kind of a mess. The good thing is that the wood shavings are large. This is much better than the fine sawdust that settles in every single surface in the workshop. I wanted to work a little bit on the nose to improve my visual understanding as I go along. Off camera I'm holding references and the design in my hand, trying to figure out where to go next all the time. It's important for me to take small breaks, just looking at where I'm at, to avoid an irreversible mistake. And you can see me go back and forth between machines, because I am new to this size of a sculpture, and a lot of the process is just trying techniques. Just doing a little bit of cleanup with my angle grinder and a 80 grit sanding disc. My next investment is going to be some more aggressive angle grinder discs. The ones I have in my mind are quite expensive, but they hold up really well over time. Time to try to block out the facial features. As you can see, I'm not going all in on one area, but I'm gently trying to remove a little bit of wood here and there to sort of reveal the sculpture beneath the wooden surface. At this point I was already happy with the placement of the eyes. A lot of it comes down to the relationships between all the parts of the head, and especially the distance and the size between all of them. It's very helpful to, for example, think the eyes are this wide compared to the nose is this wide compared to the mouth, and so on. I just pointed at the cracks on the ears. This is because I was concerned that it would be a technical problem to make them as they looked on the design. So I decided to do a little bit of carving on them to see better where the cracks would end up being. And would you look at that, a small hint of personality has already started to take shape in Amodius. I based the design off of a jaguar, but it seems to me to be taking more of an appearance of a lion. My plan is to have the jaw muscle large to emphasize the jaguar look. But since this is already based in fantasy, it does not matter what kind of animal it will end up looking the most like in the end. I am sticking to fantasy in my designs, since it is what I feel gives me the most freedom as I'm drawing. But trying to go for an anatomically correct animal one time would be the ultimate challenge. As of now, I am focusing on doing what is most meaningful and motivating to me, and that is doing these whimsical looking designs. And also, I have an idea to try to make a living off of this, as I mentioned earlier in my videos. I have not sold or tried to sell any of my sculptures yet, since the plan was initially to save them up for an exhibition at the end of the year. But because of the need for more equipment, I do want to start selling them very soon. When I do, I will be adding them in my website. I also have a plan to start taking custom orders in January next year. This is very intimidating for me, but I cannot think of a better feeling than making a client happy by realizing their vision. I also cannot think of a worse thing than letting a client down, so there's that. I went outside of the workshop to do some more cleanup. We have had a great summer so far this year in northern Norway, but I cannot say I'm ready for the winter just yet. My next step for the sculpture is to start redefining the hole underneath the head. I'm still going to remove a lot of material, and that is why I can use a marker instead of a pencil. And soon it became clear to me just how beautiful the contrast between the dark and the light wood was. I must say I got pretty hyped to apply oil on this sculpture once the carving would be complete. The size of this sculpture is kinda where I want to stay for a while. This is because it gives me enough room to fit the amount of detail I want in my work. There is also this thing where halfway into the project I kinda want to start on a new sculpture. People who make stuff can probably relate a lot to this. So since this size takes about a month to finish, I would say it is perfect for me. However, I will probably go bigger eventually, but perhaps for the rest of the year I will stick to this size. As a kid I would alternate between a ton of different projects, pretty much finishing none of them. I think I still got a small part of that in me, so it's really a challenge to bring something to fully completion. But it's a good exercise for my mind. Back into the workshop we go. Now I got most of the rough carving complete, and it is time to continue with the facial features. I pointed at the nose, but you can see me working on multiple areas at the same time. I really have to critique myself a little bit for not sticking to one area at a time. I'm just mentioning this because I feel like the video experience would be better if you could see the progress more chronologically. I do, however, sometimes get totally carried away, forgetting I'm even making a YouTube video. And in my mind, at the moment that happens, I am aware and I'm thinking, oh well, it's really the sculpture that is the thing I should be focusing on. But once I sit in my office editing, I can get kind of furious at myself when I all of a sudden feel like there are missing shots from the project. It is very important for me to try to make a YouTube video good, since a successful YouTube video gives me such a motivational boost to start with my next project. So as you just saw, I celebrated a little bit, getting the eyes alright when it came to placement and proportions. I can really feel that I'm getting a lot of benefit from previous work and that I am able to be more confident with the cuts. I do try my best, but I'm still trying to maintain the it's totally alright to fail mentality. Above all, this mentality saves me time. Time that otherwise would be wasted standing still and being afraid to even do anything. So almost the entire sculpture is symmetrical, but during the designing process I decided I wanted the beard to look as if wind was blowing through it. I think this really gave it a nice appearance and made the sculpture more lifelike. I might have mentioned in my previous video that I would not do a symmetrical sculpture next, but I must have forgotten that. Perhaps the next project after this I can be more true to my words. I'm not sure if this applies to everyone, but for me it really helps keep my mind and body relaxed by taking breaks every 20 to 30 minutes of work. In my early 20s I would have this horrible mentality of trying to be more productive by not taking breaks. This was such a bad approach and it made the quality of my work suffer. Rushing things are not the way to go, at least for me. Now I have made a lot of progress on the facial features of the carving. I'm very happy so far. The only thing I would like to be different would have been that the eyes would be a little bit more closed, to try to portray a more dreaming look, as if he is looking out the horizon, thinking about something coming. I want to take a moment and welcome all my new subscribers, and if you have not subscribed yet and want to support me, a good way is to do so. Thank you so much. Here I am working on the indentations between the lines of the whiskers. I wanted to give them a wavy look. After working this much on the head, I am happy to say that I feel like I did capture the personality of Amodius that I was going for. A kind-hearted and wise old creature. The surface is still pretty rough, but you can start to get an idea of the colors the head will have. The log itself had two dark circles inside of it. One of them ended up across the snout, which I am really happy about. There are several holes in the sculpture stemming from where the branches were and the center of the log itself. I was going to leave all of them as they were, but this hole kinda seemed out of place to me, so I decided to fill it with a wooden stick saturated in epoxy. I mixed sawdust into the epoxy to replicate the area's color to the best of my ability. This is a technique I used for my previous sculpture as well, since it also had a hole running through it. I bought 2 additional logs the size of this sculpture for future use, and they also have holes running through them. A fun fact is that they came from the same tree as the one Amodius is made from. A part of me feel like I have to make Amodius's relatives or something out of those, since they are from the same tree. But I know myself well enough to know that it will not happen. I like to vary a lot between each design to keep things fresh. Now I just need to grind away the excess epoxy. After I do that, you can clearly see the difference still between the epoxy and the wood, but once the oil is applied, it will look pretty seamless. Back to some cleanup and redefining of the shapes. This part is mostly done off camera. It is not as high risk as the roughing out phase, so I often enjoy this part just as a way to relax. For this project I used a die grinder for the first time. It is kind of a larger version of a Dremel. It worked great to carve things like this hole running through the base of the sculpture. What is left to carve now is the bottom of the base. In order to do that, I need to glue a small log onto the sculpture so that I can get to all the places I need to get to. I'm just using a small firewood log and epoxy for this. I was a bit afraid that the sculpture would not get glued well enough to the log and fall off mid-carving like the otter shaman sculpture did, so I tried to use a liberal amount of epoxy. As you can see later in the project, it did not end up being a strong bond. In the beginning of the year, I started a series on my YouTube channel I decided to call Becoming Famous for My Sculptures. That is still my goal for the year, but I have decided to change the title of my videos to improve the click rate. So I apologize that I have succumbed to the algorithm gods. Back into the workshop we go, and I can now start to carve the final part of the sculpture. I must say that I really liked working with large curves and surfaces. It was a lot of fun to figure out how to get the right balance of it. I guess it all comes down to one simple thing, and that is, does it look good? I will probably have a similar approach to my next sculpture, but as I already mentioned, I do want to make it less symmetrical. A fox is something I would like to try my hands on, but I have also been thinking about making something that has to do with water, where I can play with wavy forms through the whole design. Or since I already made a sculpture of an otter with a heavy element of water to it, perhaps I should go for a more rigid design inspired by rocky shapes. This would for sure be a challenge. The first animal I can think of when I think of rocks and cliffs has to be this crazy mountain sheep that seem to be defying the laws of physics. Here you can see me changing up the design a bit. That is because I did not want to make the bottom rear part of the sculpture that sharp. It would simply be too vulnerable to be broken off, especially given the orientation of the wood. It's funny how, for me, taking into account all these technical considerations actually seem to improve the design. It is like a hidden law or something that directs my designs towards an improved version. Now I am marking up the area where I want the inscriptions to be at. This is a part of the carving I had been looking forward to a lot, because I had great faith that it was going to look really nice in the end. I did decide to freehand the inscriptions because I thought it would give the swirls and all more flow to it. I have practiced a lot to follow my intuition as I become more and more experienced with these sculptures. Yesterday I had this crazy idea of trying to freehand a sculpture this size. What I mean by that is to not make a design beforehand, but instead use a lot of references and try to figure out what I will make as I go along. Perhaps this will make a more dynamic sculpture, or perhaps the complete opposite, since it might be very stressful. Either way, it would be fun to try. Maybe going for a smaller sculpture first will be the best. Just about to finish off these inscriptions. The approach I used was to have some main branches, if you will, and then work my way off of those into smaller and more curvy lines. I was very happy with how clear the invisible border between the inscriptions and the rest of the sculpture became. I was thinking about carving lines going along the swirls, but I think the way I decided to go for made it look a lot better. I do not really put much thought into trying to create my own style with my carvings, and I have never made an effort to do so, but I do however hope that maybe I have some kind of style. It mostly comes down to two things: trying to capture a certain mood and at the same time thinking about the limitations I'm facing when translating a design into a carving. Sometimes I get concerned that my videos are not unique enough compared to each other. I know that on YouTube you got to renew yourself to get attention. That is why I am talking a bit about my plans for all of this through my videos. I'm trying to make it more of a journey rather than just showing me making these sculptures. Regarding what I just said, I want to share with you that I plan to add the otter shaman into my shop the next time I upload a video, and perhaps even the stargazer sculpture as well. They still require a few tiny touch-ups with oil before they are completely finished. Alright, now I am pretty much done with the carving. I just need to do a lot of hand sanding to bring it to a smooth finish. I'm not showing it that well on camera, but for the larger cracks in the sculpture I had to spend a lot of time trying to remove most of the wooden fibers that was sticking out. I did not really have any tools for my machines to do this, so rolling up some 80 grit sandpaper worked well for this purpose. I was also using too high of an RPM on my Dremel when I was carving the inscriptions. This resulted in some burn marks, which took a lot of time to get rid of. I have to pat myself on the back this time, because I did a good job at finishing one fineness of sanding before continuing with the next one. For all my other sculptures, I have not done this, and it really gave me such a headache. Okay, time to try to make the base flat. I was not sure how to do this with the tools I had available, so I figured out the best way was to use a laser, mark up a line, and go for it with my handsaw. As you are about to see, this was not a very good plan. And you can also see that the epoxy I used to glue the sculpture onto the small fire log really did not make a strong bond. I do not know what entity to thank for it to not have broken up mid-carving, but I'm very happy that it did not happen. If Amodius fell on the ground and broke an ear or something off, it would be soul-crushing for me. So yeah, the weird expression I just made was when I realized I could pretty much break off the epoxy with no effort at all. I decided to try to use the angle grinder with a sanding disc to make the bottom flat. I knew I would not be able to make it 100% flat, and that is why I decided to round off the bottom edges a little bit. All in all, I think this was alright, since it would decrease the chances for the sculpture to have a small wood splinter break off at the bottom. I just for a few seconds want to show my handmade wooden pendants, which I sell in my online shop. Link is in the description. Thank you. Time to make a base for the sculpture to stand on. I bought a piece of laminated wood for this, and a bucket of black paint. Unfortunately, it did not turn out the way I wanted it to, but I finished it because I thought it would be alright to use in the video to display the finished carving in the end. And here you can see that I might be alright at making carvings, but I have not really done much carpenting at all. So my initial plan was to order a dark granite block as a base for two reasons. The first one being that granite and wood go really well together, and the second one being that granite has a lot of weight to it, and it would reduce the chances of the sculpture being tipped over. The problem with the granite block is that it would cost me over $1,000 to have it made. This is of course something I could do if I found a buyer for the sculpture. I'm not sure when I will try to sell Amodius, but when I do, I will add him in my shop and I will have figured out how to deal with the base. Another idea could be to have a block similar to the one I'm making here, just in some dark walnut wood. Not with too much figure in it, because I want that to be reserved for the sculpture only. This might be something I have to outsource to make sure the edges of the box becomes perfect. If I ever fulfill my dream of having a gigantic workshop with all the tools I could ever dream of, making a box of walnut for a sculpture to stand on would be something I could have easily done. It's good to have dreams and future plans. Just touching up the screw holes and other defects with some wood finishing mass. Looking back, I think the result would have been a lot better if I did not use screws. The reason is that after I painted the block, the fibers of the wood showed through the paint, which really was a nice effect. But it became clear where the screws were, because those areas was completely flat without any wooden fibers. I started this carving in the beginning of June, and I have been working anywhere from 2 to 4 hours most days since then. I think it is safe to say that I have spent about 100 to 120 hours on it in total, not counting the designing phase. If you take the designing phase into the consideration as well, I have probably spent around 150 hours total. This project has been such a journey, and I'm grateful I was able to go through with it. Now it is finally time to add oil to the sculpture. I will let the music play a bit, and then comes the final reveal. Back in 2018, I decided I want to make sculptures, and I started with this owl made from birch. At that time I thought, wow, this is big. And after I made it, I was thinking, I want to make a really big sculpture one day, like Amodius. And that day has finally come, so I want to thank you all for the support through the years. It has given me so much motivation and pushed me. So with that being said, let's reveal the final result.